Hey, pool chasers. Welcome to the second episode in our 4-part filter series. Today is all about sand filters. We all know what they look like, but do we know exactly how they work and the terminology? Well, our guests today break down the anatomy of a sand filter, what backwashing is truly intended to do, why the laterals are important and when to change them out, and when and how to do a proper sand change. Please enjoy episode 127 with Frank Swindell and Mike Childress of Pentair.
Welcome to your go-to podcast for the pool and spa industry. My name is Tyler Rasmussen.
And my name is Greg Viafania. And this is the Pool Chasers Podcast.
All right, well, thank you guys both for joining us again on the podcast. For those that may have not heard the previous episode, can you please introduce yourself and what your role at Pentair is?
Yes, Frank Swindell, Product Manager of Filters and Valves for Pentair Pool, responsible for all filter valve product lines sold into the pool industry. Been with the company since 1980.
And my name is Mike Childress. I'm a regional training manager for Pentair. I am part of a team that is responsible for developing and conducting training on Pentair equipment and hydraulic and electrical training and education for the industry. I've been with Pentair since 1990.
Awesome. Got some veterans in the room. We want to focus here on this episode on sand filters. So we'll start with, can you kind of break down the anatomy of a sand filter? Explain how it works from when the water enters the filter to where it goes back in the pool? What happens inside that filter?
Yes, I'll take the first step of this. With sand filtration, basically the media that does the actual cleaning of the debris out of the water is of course sand. Sand has been used to clean water since the creation of Earth. Rain comes down, falls on the earth, filters through the ground, sand, then you dig wells and drink water. Same type of process is utilized in a pool filter. Basically, you have a pump that pumps water from this body of water or pool into the filter. It usually passes through as I mentioned in our last podcast, a directional valve. So it directs the water into the inlet of the filter. Once it enters the filter, it goes through the upper piping assembly. On our side mount versions, we do have side mount and top mount, but the water comes in the inlet and then it heads to a diffuser. Diffuser basically is something that actually is usually above the sand bed with multiple holes in it that allow the water to be evenly distributed over the sand bed. So when you're moving the water at certain flow rates, you want it to keep that sand bed flat. So the diffuser is important to evenly distribute the water or dirty water over the sand bed so you have an effective filter bed. So it passes through the diffuser. Now that dirty water is now being pushed through the sand bed. The sand bed itself, as I mentioned in a previous episode, your particles of sand, if you look at them under a microscope, you have very, very sharp edges to sand. So as they nest together, you have this treacherous path of water of where the water can move. And as it moves through these crevices of the sand, those crevices start catching the particles. As the water continues to flow through time and time again, it fills up that voids in the sand. You've got the effective square footage, which is the top layer of sand, and then you have the depth to where it starts breaking the particles and holding the particles that you're filtering out. As it travels through the sand bed, at the bottom of the sand bed are laterals. Laterals are usually tubular in structure with slots in them. These slots are actually smaller than the smallest particle of sand in the system. So what it does is it basically keeps the sand in the vessel, but allows the water to pass through these slots. That's usually the very clean water, and the clean water then travels through a lower piping assembly back out of the vessel into the valve, where it's redirected to either the heater, but now it's on the clean side heading back to the pool. Inside of the sand filter, there's also what we have as and National Sanitation Foundation, or NSF, requires all filters have an internal air relief. Internal air relief actually travels from the dirty side of the water to the clean side of the water. So you basically have a screen that's up at the very top point of the filter. So if any air gets into the filter, it's trapped up at the very top. It's lighter than the water, so it actually moves up the top. And as Mike said earlier, it can be compressed. And so you have a higher pressure on the dirty side than you do the clean side. So the other end of this tube is usually attached to the clean return pipe inside the filter, which is a lower pressure. So the difference between the vortex of the water traveling and the pressure differential sucks the air out and takes it out the return and is then expelled back into the pool to keep the vessel full of water. Very critical in sand, as Mike said earlier, as you're using variable speeds, speed pumps, this pressure differential and flow between the dirty and the clean side is not as drastic. So removing the air with a variable speed pump takes a little bit longer time than with the old conventional 1 or 2 speed pumps. We also, on all of our filters, all of our Triton filters or side-mounted filters, we have a manual air relief. Basically, whenever you're turning your pump on and off, that's the first thing you want to open it up. Make sure you got water, not air, coming out of the air relief. So on startup, as you're filling it up, you want that open. When you have a steady stream of water coming out, that's when you want to close it. And anytime you maintenance the filter, you always open and close it. All of our filters, sand filters, have a drain. And the drain is basically at the bottom of the filter, lowest point we can get it, so that you can drain the water out. In areas of the country where you have freezing issues, you want to make sure that once you shut your system down for the winter, you remove the drain plug and allow the water to drain out so you don't have any freeze issues. I think that covers the overall functionality of a sand filter. Now, we do have a tagless top mount system. In that system, your water comes in and out the valve, the inlet outlets in the valve, and the diffusers in the valve. So when your dirty water comes in, it passes through the valve, and then the very lowest portion of the valve has a bunch of holes, and those holes are what the diffuser, which actually spray the water out over the sand bed, travels through the sand bed just like in a Triton filter, through the laterals, and then it's got a single column standpipe that brings the clean water back up into a clean chamber of the valve, which then carries it on to the rest of the system.
Right. Yeah, that's a great explanation. Mike, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you covered it from A to Z pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. So once I choose to go with a sand filter for my pool, how do I know which size to use?
Size is dependent on the amount of water you have in your pool. And so what you want to do is you want to do, again, the calculation. How many gallons of water do I have? How many do I need? So once I know the size of the filter, and if you don't know that, in most of our literature, we have a way of, we have the formula on how to calculate length times width times average depth to come up with how many gallons of water you have. Then you do you calculate your gallons per minute needed, and then you look at the size filter that's on the chart, and that's the minimum you have to have. Again, most cases, people will, again, go a size or two larger, and all that does is just gives you more dirt holding capacity and more time between cleaning cycles.
With a sand filter, this is one of the filters where you have to be careful. If you oversize a sand filter, you're going to lose its effective operational capacity. Not only do you have a filter that is sized by flow rate, it's also cleaned by flow rate as well. So if you choose too large of a sand filter, let's say you put a TR100, which is a 100 gallon per minute filter. If you put that filter on a job where you have the max of 65, 75 gallons per minute, that is going to filter very well, but you're not going to clean that filter. When you backwash the filter and you reverse the flow, if you don't have enough flow, you're not going to lift that you're not going to lift that size filter area enough to clean it. You're not going to lift the sand bed with a lower flow rate. So when it comes to sizing sand filters, you kind of want to hit the nail on the head with the sand filter. If you oversize it, it'll filter great, but you're not going to be able to clean it. So your pressures are going to continuously rise. You'll backwash, you'll never get pressure low like it should be, and your pressures keep jumping up on you. So with sand filters, it's important to size them correctly, and that's sized by flow rate. How many gallons per minute are you going to be operating that system at?
I've never heard the backwashing part you just said. That's pretty cool. Pretty good explanation.
Well, what you have there is on a sand filter, when you look at the rating on a sand filter is rated for a maximum flow rate. So basically, maximum flow rate for a sand filter residential is 20 gallons per minute per square foot. So when you're in the filtering process, it's a maximum. But when you look at what NSF requires for backwash, it's a minimum flow rate. So for sand filtration, you got to have a minimum of 15 gallons per minute per square foot to effectively backwash a sand filter. So as Mike said, if your filter is oversized and you keep your pumps or even a variable speed pump, as you set it down, and we're saying for energy consumption, you're going to set that flow rate low so you can filter at a lower flow rate. But when you go to backwash, you've got to be able to change that flow rate from that 25 gallons per minute up to a 70 gallons per minute or 80 gallons per minute to effectively backwash. So it is important that if you've got only a single speed pump that you hit it the nail on the head. If you have a variable speed pump, you really got to pay attention to the proper flow rates to adequately backwash. And each media has that requirement. But yes, it is very important that you follow those rules.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, I've never heard that as far as the sizing, so that's really cool. But you're talking about backwashing. Can you explain what backwashing is exactly and why it's necessary?
Yes, backwashing is the method for cleaning a sand filter and DE filter. When you're in the process of flowing the dirty water through the sand bed and it's capturing in the sand, into those little crevices of sand, over time, your flow rate will be diminishing, your pressures will be increasing. And what happens is when you have that increase in pressure, you're not effectively filtering the water, because when you're filtering the water, you want it to move, and the amount of flow determines your turnover rate. So if you rated this to do a turnover in 12 hours at, say, 35 gallons per minute, and now you're down to 20 gallons per minute, you're not effectively getting enough water through there. So that's time to clean, which we call backwash. And the backwash, you basically, in sand filtration, you have a valve on your system. You could be a push-pull valve, which is just a two position valve, which is filter or backwash, or it could be a multiport valve. Our multiport valves have 5 positions. And what you'll do is you'll move it from the filter position to the backwash position. What this does is this changes the flow of water. So now it takes the water that's coming from your pool and it directs it through the outlet. So it's coming in backwards. So it comes in through in our case on the Triton, it comes into the lower bulkhead, which is the outlet and filter position. It travels through the lower piping, through the laterals. So now it's coming back through those slots of the laterals at the bottom of the filter, at the very bottom. And what it does is it starts flowing back up through the sand bed. And what it does is, Mike mentioned earlier, you got to have enough flow to lift this sand bed. When I say lift, what you're doing is it's basically just shaking it, and it's stirring up the sand. And what it does is, as it's breaking up that sand, now the sand is moving, and the particles that are caught between the sand and in the crevices of the sand now are being released. And so what it does is it allows these particles that have been caught to raise up to the top area of the filter. And you got to have enough flow rate to get it out of that sand and into the holes in the opening of the diffuser. So now all this dirt is now flowing through the path of least resistance, which are these holes in the diffuser. And now they travel out that upper piping back into the valve, where the chamber it enters now in the valve is the waste chamber, which now directs the water down a waste line. A lot of times in a sand filter, you have a sight glass either in the valve or in the line someplace. So as you see this happening, you see the water's got like a brown or dirty look to it. So as this is running down, you really want to pay attention to that water until it runs clear. In most cases, it's 3 to 5 minutes before the water is running truly clear. Once that's happened, then you turn off your pump, you change the valve back to push-pull valve, you put it back in filter and go right back to filter. If it's a multiport valve, you may want to put it in a rinse mode. What the rinse mode does with on a multiport valve is it basically redirects the water, settling your sand back down. But while it's doing that, it takes all the particles and it continues the water out the waistline. So anything that's caught in the lines or on top in the valve itself are kind of rinsed out. And then you go back to filter and start the process over again.
Yeah, and you mentioned the multiport has 5 different kind of functions. What are the other functions of a multiport?
What's nice about the multiport valve, when you have other categories of the multiport valve, you have a bypass. So like if you're running your system and you don't want to cut the filter off, but you want to to check something on your filter, you can bypass the filter. So basically all the water does is it comes into the valve and then goes right into the pool. So if you got a slow leak on a multiport valve, you could actually turn it to bypass, and now you can service your filter while it's on bypass because the water's not passing through the filter. You have a closed state, which basically closes it off when you want to winterize.
Yeah,
and the rinse, like I said earlier, it basically just runs the water back through just to settle the sand bed back down.
Yeah, awesome. You covered them. Yeah, I mean, that's two kind of things you'll see out in the field is the push-pull valve or multi-ports, and they do different things. So thank you for touching on that.
And real quick, where exactly is the water going when we're backwashing? I know there's, different locations that the water can go to, but I think that's another important thing to talk about, because if your backyard's not set up for just a regular hose to be watering a lawn, it's important to understand that, that water's got to go somewhere. It doesn't always go to the sewer.
Yeah, and most of your metropolitan areas is plumbed into the sanitation system or sewer. But in a more rural setting, it could be simply a backwash hose or rolled out into your side yard, or it could be hard plumbed, and it could be hard plumbed into a wooded area of your yard. So it's usually up to the pool builder. Usually, homeowner maybe have some input, but usually the pool builder surveys the location of the pool, and when he's putting this in, directing where he wants that wastewater to go. Because when you're looking at cleaning a system, it could be in the neighborhood of 200-300 gallons of water that are coming out when you're performing this operation.
Right. And I say that I have a really funny story that goes along with this. So we're about a year into our pool service company, and this pool is extremely cloudy. So I decide I'm going to backwash on this new pool service bid. And I don't know where the backwash goes to. And the couple, this older couple is out there with me, and they're excited, that I might figure this out. So it is a sand filter, and I go to backwash, and this hose come whipping out of the leaves and shoots up and sprays the gentleman, the homeowner, all over. I mean, green water sprays him completely. I wanted to die, but the wife was laughing hysterically. He didn't think it was quite as funny, but I stopped it. I did find it. I want you all to learn from this. Anybody listening, locate where that water's going. But I just wanted to share that. That was a lesson learned.
I think a good point to bring up when we talk about cleaning filters, and I'm going to say this over and over again when it comes to cleaning a filter, a lot of us overlook that a filter operates under pressure and it's in a compressed state. So before you clean any filter, turn the pump off and let the filter relax. Take it off of pressure, let it decompress, go find something else to do for 5 minutes. Check your water chemistry, brush the steps, whatever you may need to do it during this time frame. Let the filter sit under no pressure. Even with a sand filter, when a sand filter operates, the water comes in the top and it's pushing down on the sand, compressing it. If you take the pressure away, the sand will relax. That way, when you go into backwash mode 5 minutes later, that sand bed has already started to loosen up some. Now, when the water comes backwards through the sand, it's easier to lift the sand evenly. If the sand filter is still compressed, you go from filter to backwash without waiting, water is going to take the path of least resistance. So when it comes in the bottom of that tank, the first place it breaks through that sand bed is likely going to be the only place it breaks through the sand bed. And you'll end up only cleaning portions of the sand filter. It's going to cause you to lose your effective filtration area, because if you don't clean it, it's going to stay dirty and compacted, and you're only using half the sand bed now. So it's an important thing to let homeowners know, especially with sand filters, because a lot of homeowners will want to do the cleanings themselves, is to turn the pump off and find something else to do, let it decompress, and then backwash 3 to 5 minutes later. And backwash for the appropriate time. Give it that 3 to 5 minutes backwash time until your line is clear.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's a good point for pool technicians as well, because if you're not cleaning the filter properly, then you're going to think you backwashed it, right? And you didn't. And then, 2 weeks later, it's going to be like, what the heck? I just backwashed 2 weeks ago. and it's still not making a difference. So if you're not properly backwashing, giving it the amount of time it needs, don't rush it, then that affects the way the sand's actually being cleaned.
Well, from a service professional aspect, it means even more, because that's not the only pool you have to take care of.
Right.
If you backwash it properly, it's going to give you longer filter cycles. That means there's less maintenance to do at every job you have to go to.
Right.
So if you're given that time, it's going to be a more effective clean, and it's going to give you a longer cycle time, so you're not cleaning it as often. And let's say you have 100 pools to take care of every month. That's going to play into how much time you're spending on every job. You get longer filter cycles, you're going to be able to do your job more effectively.
Right.
And I got something else I want to throw in here as well, because it's something that I have seen. I have been called to backyards when people couldn't understand why their filter, or they thought their filter was not working. It's very important that you don't backwash by time alone. You got to let a sand filter do its job. I've been on cases where people would go in and backwash their filter before they swam in it every day. And what they're basically getting down to is they're saying, I can't get my pool clean. And the issue is that, as any filter does, it's directed to start cleaning out a certain particle size. And then that particle helps catch smaller particles. So the dirtier a filter gets, actually, the better it actually filters. So there's a good balance between clean water and dirty water when we're saying, hey, I want to make sure I'm in these parameters. Because you backwash too soon, you're stripping the water of all the particles that are large enough to start plugging the filter up. And then you have overabundance of particles that are just small enough to fit through all those crevices that don't get caught because you've taken the larger particles out.
Right.
And then it becomes cloudy water and doesn't filter effectively because you're taking out that step. So let it filter until flow's reduced by 30% or 40%, or when your pressure increases 8 to 10 psi, that's what you have to do. Let the filter work. If you short cycle that, you start messing the entire system up.
If you clean it too much, it doesn't matter what kind of filter it is. If you clean it too often, you're stripping the life of the filter. Sand filters especially, because they backwash, and the particles of sand are beating against each other when you backwash them, and it knocks the sharp edges of those sand particles off. Now, when you go back to filter mode, it doesn't have the sharp edges, so it starts to get a tighter and tighter compact in the filter between the sand particles, and it shortens your cycle up dramatically. I've seen people backwash every Friday because that's their ritual, and within 3 years, they've worn out the sand in the sand filter. It will gain 10-pound rise in 2 days, so they have no cycle time on a sand filter anymore.
Yeah. That's why we always try to do it every 4 weeks or so. Make sure that it gives it proper amount of time to work. I think that's a good point. A lot of people don't realize that you need some dirt in there to make it work more effectively. You're not trying to rinse the sand every week or every day, like you said, every time you swim. So that's a good point.
And that's a lot of wear and tear on a multi-port and on the piston assembly. You keep doing that every Friday. Before you know it, you're going to have to, swap out on a multi-port, what is that, spider gasket that has to get swapped out when you're having issues. And you might have, O-ring that breaks in the piston assembly. You're going to have all these issues that are going to become much more frequent when you're having to do it. And I'll add this tip, make sure to check the water level. I had to learn that one the hard way too. Don't just backwash. Maybe look to see where the water's at in the tile line going into the skimmer, because you start, trying to backwash when there's, barely any water going in. You're going to run into a lot of other issues because you started it and now you got to stop. And doing it only for 20, 30 seconds and having to kick it back on, you could run into some issues.
Kick the sand back in. So what are some signs that a sand filter should be backwashed? What are you seeing that, that it would indicate that?
When you're running a sand filter, best way to is if you have a flow meter on it, and you see a flow decrease by 30%. So your original flow is 60 gallons per minute. Your filter should be backwashed when you've lost 20 gallons per minute or 30%. So when you're pumping 40 gallons per minute, it's time to clean. The real easiest way, or what we tell people, is a normal operating system with a regular 1 or 2 speed pump, that equates to about 8 to 10 psi pressure rise. So when you see a reduction in your flow of 30%, it usually equates to about an 8 to 10% increase in your filter pressure. Most of our filters now come with gauges that have a faceplate that actually help you see that. It's a little, line the air of the clean air up with your startup pressure. Mm-hmm. And then it's got a clean air that basically lines up 10 PSI above that. So when you see the air hit the clean, it's time to backwash a sand filter. With the teleflow pump, it's not quite as cut and dry. You want to look at your flow more with a teleflow pump or a variable speed pump, because as Mike mentioned earlier, as you're running at the lower flow rates, your pressure rise is hardly noticed. So you start packing a lot of dirt in over that same time frame.
And I've developed a little trick that I like to use with variable speed pumps to know when it's time to clean a filter. Generally, we teach everyone anywhere between 8 and 12 PSI. I always pick 10 because it's easy to remember. 10 pounds above normal operating pressure. With a variable speed pump, you're running it very slow to make it efficient, saving the customer a lot of money, get finer filtration because you're moving the water slower through the filter. But that is going to indicate no pressure on the gauge or very little pressure on your filter gauge. You will not see a 10-pound rise using a variable speed pump on a lower speed. So what I recommend is when doing the installation of a variable speed pump, make sure the filter's clean, choose an advanced speed, a speed that's going to deliver a higher flow rate, and it's going to give you a pressure reading on that gauge anywhere 10, 15 PSI normal clean. You got an advanced flow rate, you're getting a pressure. At that point, note the filter pressure. Let's say it's 10 PSI, and then note the speed of the pump. Let's say that pump is running at 2,600 RPM. What I'll generally do is tell customers to write that information down in the customer's notes. I've even taken a Sharpie and written it on the back side of the filter so it's there, or on the underside of the filter where it's not visible to the common person. That way, when you come to do your service, your pump is running at a lower RPM. You're not reading any pressure, but the filter may have a lot of dirt in it. So at that point, you would choose that higher speed on the pump. You would advance the speed of the pump and check your filter pressure. If it was clean at 10 PSI and you advance that pressure up to 2,600, that flow up to 2,600, if your pressure is 10 pounds above that clean pressure, it's time to clean filter.
A couple other indicators that we see out there, if it has a pressure side or a suction side cleaner, they start to move a little bit slower. If it has, pop-up system, you'll see them not go up quite a bit. See poor circulation, slower moving water. Some of those things are all indicators that, a good backwash is needed.
So let's talk about the laterals in the sand filter. What is the reason for those exactly?
All right, the laterals, as mentioned earlier, are an important part of the filtration system for sand. It's a separation boundary that prevents sand from turning to the pool. So basically, it's something there that basically is a grid that says, hey, I'm holding back my media, but I want my clear water to have a path to get back to the pool. So it's got the little small slots that basically are, again, smaller than the smallest grain size that's put in. For our pool's sand filters, we recommend number 20 silica sand, pool sand. Number 20 silica sand is 18 to 22 thousandths in size. That's 18 to 22 thousandths of an inch. So the slots in our sand laterals are 16 thousandths and lower. So we're 10 thousandths plus or minus 6 thousandths on that slot. So basically, it's enough for water to travel through. And it's critical because each one of our filters has, when you look at pressure loss across a filter, one of the things you want to make sure is inlet and outlet right now. If you've got 2 inches of inlet, 2 inches of outlet, you want the equivalent open square footage of space in your laterals. So when you start looking at these slots and laterals, the number of laterals in the bottom of your filter are determined by this, how many slot openings you have, times the width, times the length. Calculate that up, and all that should equal the inside diameter of 2-inch pipe or greater, so you don't have pressure loss across the lateral systems. So that's what it is. It basically, in filtration mode, it keeps your sand in the filter and not in the pool. In your backwash mode, it is the diffusing of the water coming in to help fluidize the sand bed or lift the sand bed, fluff the sand bed to get the particles out.
Right. Thank you. And those, for people that don't know, they're kind of the like skinny white deals that sit at the bottom. Usually about how many of those are in a sand filter?
For the smaller sand filters, your 60 gallon per minute and less, there's usually 6 to 8. The larger you go, 8 to 10. But your larger sand filters also, the diameter of the laterals get a little bit bigger. And a 60 square foot and smaller, your lateral is about 1 inch in diameter. It's closer to 2.5 inch diameter in your 100, 140 models.
Perfect. And what are some signs a lateral has been broken and they need to be replaced?
The most common sign for a lateral is broken is you'll have sand deposits in the pool. This is most commonly seen just below the returns. So your return inlets back into the pool, you will see sand deposits directly in front of them. That's a key indication you have a broken lateral.
I bet you could really see that at nighttime. We were just talking about the lights being on at night with the sand filter, but I bet they would really
with a broken
shine.
lateral, you're actually going to channel the filter with a broken lateral. If the lateral compromises, as Frank said, there's a certain spacing on these laterals to block sand but allow water to pass. When these laterals are compromised, when the sand can go through there, you'll get a channeling effect. The path of least resistance will actually funnel through the sand bed and direct the sand and debris and everything right back to the pool. So you will definitely see a lot of debris in the pool because you've compromised the lateral. It'll channel the sand bed until it washes a clear path. So you have basically no filtration.
And is there any other way for sand to get back into the pool, or is it just if you see sand returning back into the pool, it's probably a lateral issue?
You have 2 other ways sand can actually get back into the pool. If it's not a lateral, your hub could crack and provide a path because all these laterals screw into a hub, and the hubs are normally 2 parts plastic are welded together. The other one is the internal air relief tube that goes from the top of the filter to the bottom. If the screen at the top pulls off and that tube falls down in the sand, it's like a straw, it'll suck sand out. Or if the joint where it meets the lower piping assembly breaks loose, again, it's an open path to start sucking some sand through.
I'm glad you brought the air relief up because that's always been a problem. You know, when you see sand, if you're not educated on what it actually looks like when a lateral is broken, we'd have a lot of times where our technicians would say, oh, this lateral is broken and you just got like a tiny bit of sand in there. Definitely recommend investigating it further, making sure that air relief is intact before you diagnose it as a broken lateral, because that is a way bigger issue than the air relief.
Yeah. It's also easier to get to because it's not all the way down at the bottom of the filter.
Exactly.
Yeah. As soon as you take the closure, open the closure on a sand filter, that air relief should be right there in your face.
Yep.
It should be actually springing up into the enclosure when you put the closure on the filter.
Right. And the only way to really change out the laterals is pretty much to do a sand change. I mean, it's pretty much the same steps, right? You gotta remove all the sand out and get in there, which leads to our next question, which is, what do you recommend? What is the proper way of doing a sand change?
With the sand change, basically it's to open the enclosure, take the top off the sand filter. That way you can get to the sand. With this, if it is a Triton style filter that has the enclosure on the top and the side mount valve, when you take the enclosure, open the filter up, take the enclosure off, you're going to remove the strainer and actually move the diffuser either right or left of your bulkhead fittings. It's actually screwed into a pipe, so you can push it right or left of the bulkhead. And then most people use a shop vac or a sand vac to remove the sand. Let's say it's a TR60, a Triton 60, that has about 325 pounds of sand. So if you were to reach in and scoop it out, it's going to take quite a while to do it. There are a lot of nice little tools out that people are using these days. There's a vacuum system that attaches to a wheelbarrow that allows you to vacuum the sand out, and it puts it right into the wheelbarrow for you. That's a very neat item I saw at a show.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Those are awesome.
Yeah, it's nice. It works very effectively. You use the large shop vac and then just dump it into a wheelbarrow and take it away. Or a sand vac where you use a garden hose and you create the vortex and you vacuum it out in that manner.
Right. And do you recommend, if you already have to do a sand change, even if the laterals aren't broken, do you recommend doing it anyway? Just replace, what are some good practices since you've already gotten the sand out, since it's a lot of physical labor in doing a sand change? Is there any recommendations once you've already gotten all the sand out?
What I would recommend is your vessel is going to be, you take a hose, rinse it out, look, inspect the laterals closely. You can use a flashlight, look at the laterals and say, hey, do I see anywhere? You want good sharp peaks on your slots of laterals. If you've had one crack, they not normally are made to fail. It's a pretty rigid plastic part. For it to fail, something had to happen. So if you had one fail, while while your sand's out, you may want to go ahead and replace all the laterals. At least then you're starting fresh again. You know how old your filter is. But look at your plumbing. Make sure your pipe still looks good. It's mostly everything is 2-inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe and fittings. But just do a quick glance with a light to make sure that everything still looks in working order. Make sure you got a good connection between intra-airleaf tubing, fitting that's on the pipe. Make sure that's good and snug before you start putting sand back in.
And I would second that. You're vacuuming the sand out, and I've seen a lot of people damage the laterals, as in you're vacuuming the sand out. You hit the lateral and you knock one of the little vents open. You crack some of the pieces out of it. So I do recommend as well, changing the laterals when doing a sand change, because you're going to want to take them out to physically observe them, and you can't do that while they're in the bottom of the tank. And I do recommend just go ahead and changing those while you're at it, because the last thing you want to do is put 300 to 600 pounds of sand in a filter and you had a small crack created in the sand change, and now you're going to have to take the sand back out again.
Right. And there's also, the cap at the bottom you can take off when you're rinsing out kind of the filter bowl to get rid of all that excess. So what do you recommend? You get the, new laterals in, you put the new sand in, you put all the pieces back together and make sure that the top is back on with the tool that comes with the sand filter. What are your recommendations for kind of the startup of the filter at that point? Because that's another lesson I think we've had to learn the hard way.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what you want to make sure is when you put the sand back in, you want to make sure that what I would do first of all is put my valve in a rinse position and rinse everything, because any of the sand that may be in the piping and the valve, at least you rinse that to waste and it doesn't come out your pool. It doesn't confuse you that you got a problem in the pool. Again, first thing I do, make sure when you put the closure back on, you do open the air relief. That's the most critical thing. Make sure that air relief is open. So as you're pumping water in, whether it's in the rinse mode or whether it's in a filter mode, you want that air relief open so you're allowing, as the water fills up, you've got the ability for that water to force the air out as it's filling up with water. But one of the most critical things is when you're putting the sand back in, you want to fill the vessel itself quarter to half full of water before you start dumping sand in, because all that weight of the sand hitting directly on the laterals, you could damage the laterals. So if you have some water in the vessel, half full, that water helps dampen that impact on the laterals as it's loading the sand into the filter. That's the first thing I would recommend. Make sure once you got everything replaced, you fill the filter half full of water, and then you start putting the sand in. If you have one of our top mount filters, our taglesses or our sand dollars, they do come with a sand guide. The sand guide, what it does is it covers up that center piping, and it has holes around the edge of it to allow the sand to go in the filter and not go in your standpipe. If you don't have a sand guide, you really want to put a cup or something over it. The other thing the sand guide does is it does keep that standpipe in the center of the filter, and that's pretty critical because the valve is going to go over this pipe, and when it's full of sand, you want to make sure that you have it in the center, but you do want it covered up, taped over or something, so you don't have sand going down there and maybe mislead you that you have another problem with sand or lateral cracking because you got sand going back to the pool. And just follow your normal startup procedures from there.
And I like to add, like Frank said, If you have the rinse position and the multiport valve, before you go into filter mode after a sand change, if you don't have the ability to rinse, let's say you have a push-pull valve, backwash for a few seconds before you go into filter mode. Because when you're adding sand in here, you can get sand in the diffuser, and you don't want to have that system fire up and you blow that puff of sand right back into the pool. And now you have to clean that mess up.
Yep. Good recommendation there for sure. I've done that a couple of times.
As I've learned the hard way on that myself.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sucks.
And how often do you recommend doing a sand change?
With a sand change, I recommend doing on that as need, not by time. And I gauge that as in how long your filter cycles are. If you're having to backwash a sand filter every 7 to 10 days, you may want to look into doing a sand change. You want to have long filter cycles. When they start to get very short, that means your sand bed is compromised to some aspect. You may have some calcification. You may have the age of the sand. Water chemistry plays a big effect in the sand filter as well, the life of the sand. I've seen filters actually put in the 60s and 70s that still have the original sand in them and still work perfect. I've seen filters that you put sand in them and you backwash them every other day, and they're done in a year. They have to have sand change in a year. So it really depends on how well everything is taken care of, your water chemistry. There's a lot of factors that come into play, but I would really say, the biggest thing that's going to lead me to changing the sand is how quick my cycles diminish. If I have to clean that filter once a week, it's time to change the sand in it.
And it's real critical there because basically, like Mike said, the backwashing of the sand breaks those edges off and makes it less effective. And like you said, there's lots of areas that you keep your maintenance schedules, regularly. You watch your water chemistry so that your water stays clear. So you're not having to backwash that often. Where people have gone 10 plus years, majority of their sand changes are made because sand manufacturers are saying you need to replace your sand. So make sure you use Mike's rule of thumb. Hey, filter's not having to be backwashed every week. You don't really need to do a sand change. It's more we don't sell the sand, so it's not like we're recommending sand changes. So if somebody says, why do I recommend the sand change? I basically tell people, I don't tell you to change the sand. I'm not telling you this is when you change the sand.
Yeah.
So it's critical to know who's telling you need to change your sand. What's the reason you think you need to change your sand, and understand.
Right.
Don't change it because you're being told. Change it because of how the filter's functioning.
Yeah.
And another point to that, sand filters with a little bit of age become more efficient. You get a little bit of wear on a sand filter, it becomes more efficient. It collects smaller debris. So it gets better. So there's a point in a filter that it's maximum efficiency. And that is a filter that has a little bit of life to it.
Right.
A 2-year-old filter that's properly maintained is going to filter at a finer rate than it was when it was brand new. Believe it or not, it gets better before it gets worse.
Broken in.
And then when it does get worse, you're cleaning it too often. The cycles shorten up to where you're cleaning it more often than you need to.
And I think you said earlier, you want the sand to be rigid. A good sign is if you're the sand is really, really smooth, you probably want to do that. And I think the rule of thumb is kind of every 3 to 5 years for pool service companies. That's what we use. But like you said, make sure that, it actually needs to be done, and everything you guys mentioned is really good. But that's kind of when we start to look at whether the sand is an issue, is about 3 to 5 years. Typically, if you're running, your normal 8 to 10, 12 hours a day, that's kind of a wear and tear of it for what we noticed anyways.
And also, every homeowner has different lifestyles. I mean, if they've got a bunch of dogs that are jumping in the pool, and you've got trees, and you've got, just crazy crap that's going on in this backyard. Of course, maybe my pool where nothing is going on. There's no vegetation. There's nothing. And I could probably have that for 20 years opposed to somebody that has, 5 dogs that jump in. They've got palm trees that are dropping in. They've got, little kids that are doing crazy stuff in the pool. So it depends on the lifestyle in the backyard as well.
I think you're hitting on something that we should actually begin teaching to the pool professionals. Take good notes on the pool.
Yeah, for sure.
Take a note of the things you just mentioned, their lifestyle, if they have pets, things to that nature. Because a service professional, if I know the environment that pool has to endure, I know what kind of precautions to take to better suit that service. And also take notes on your filter pressures. If you're there every week, take a note of the filter pressure when it's clean, when you do the cleaning, what it is after the cleaning. That way you know what your cycles are. And when you see those cycles start to shorten up, that's going to be the indication you can take to the homeowner and justify the reason that they need the sand changed or a new cartridge or a new DE grid assembly. It just helps justify what the customer's needs are and what you have to do in that backyard to maintain their pool.
Absolutely. As far as like a new sand filter, I wanted to just not forget this part. When you purchase, a brand new filter, it comes with the tank body, but it doesn't come with the backwash assembly, correct? So you'll need to get that.
The Triton and the System 3 sand filters do not. All of our top mount models, the tagless, the Sand Dollar, the Crystal Flow, come with the backwash valve is included in the purchase of the filter. The reason we don't do it with the Triton or the System 3, you have the ability to put a push-pull, a rotary type, or a multiport type valve on the system. It's your choice from there.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. You kind of just mentioned them, but your different brands you have out there of sand filters, is the Triton, the Sand Dollar, tagless, System 3. Anything else that we're missing?
And the Sand Dollar and Crystal Flow are our blow molded options.
Okay.
And they're both top mount systems.
Cool. Awesome. Well, it's been a great episode. Thank you for all the awesome information, and we appreciate it. And thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Pool Chasers. Thanks for checking out this episode. Did you know that each episode has its own page on our website? This is where you can find more information about the guest and episode topic, as well as all the resources that we discuss throughout the show. To get to the webpage, click the link below. Also below, you will find links to the sponsors of the show, as well as links to follow us on our social media channels. On our channels, you will find some of our favorite clips and bonus material. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our tag is Pool Chasers. We also have a Facebook group for the Pool Chasers community. Here you will find like-minded professionals all looking to make each other better. One last thing. If the episode has brought you value, please check out our Patreon page to support us. And if you could please rate and review the podcast, we would love to hear what your favorite topics are. Thank you for your time and your ear.
See you out there, Pool Chasers.